Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to this parallel session. We were there just 10 seconds ago, and now we are here. So welcome. I suggest that, I don't know if I have to, I don't know. Is there anybody here that is in charge for technical?
Yes, Giulia, I am.
Okay, hi, Rodrigo. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, everyone.
So
I'm just trying to make the speakers co-host in order for them to be able to share their presentations.
Okay.
So
if you want, I can admit two persons that are in the waiting room.
Yeah, I think you should be able to do it.
Okay.
I just did it. And okay, so the speakers are Marco Degano, Marco Facchin, and Giacomo Zanotti.
And Giacomo Zanotti, okay. Yes.
Okay, so
okay.
Our
do you think we can start now or in 1 minute or 2 minutes? Yes.
Yeah, maybe we can just wait a couple of minutes to see if.
Okay. Yeah. So let's start at 6:45. So we have a quarter of hour late. We are. I received a suggestion from the organizers and they suggested me to shift the discussion of all 3 papers at the end of the session. So we will have 3 papers, 10 minutes each, and then a general discussion, not general because the questions hopefully will be directed to each speaker. Marco Facchin, do you want to try to share your screen? Okay, perfect. Okay, so it's now 6:45. I think we can start with our first speaker, who is Marco Facchin from IUSS Pavia. And his talk is on Markov blankets that would not rule out the extended mind hypothesis. Please, Marco.
Yes. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I'll jump right in because I'm short on time. So to start, a very quick introduction on extended mind. And as I understand it, the extended mind hypothesis starts from the observation that at least sometimes our ability to complete cognitive tasks relies heavily on the usage of external resources. So for instance, think at the role of pen and paper in doing math. Okay. Now, the hypothesis is that at least sometimes the brain resource coordination is so tight that the two form a single coupled system in which the two components are jointly responsible for the production of our cognitive performance. Okay. And in such cases, the cognitive machinery extends in the sense that the external resource is a cog in your thinking machinery. Now, an important point here is that this is a claim just about the machinery of cognition, and so it is in principle compatible with numerous accounts of what cognition is. And predictive coding is one such account. So very quickly, predictive coding basically is an account of cortical activity that tells you that cortical activity aims to minimize the discrepancy in between expected and predicted sensory states, which is called prediction error. And cognition should arise from that activity of error minimization. So there are, broadly speaking, 2 ways in which error can be minimized, either by changing the expectations, so to make them fit the incoming input, or the other way around, change the incoming input through movement, so to make it fit the expectation. And this is relevant here because if the story is correct, then you have a means to encounter the sensory state you expect. And that is what very quickly put predictive coding in touch with the free energy principle. Now, The free energy principle is a whole other story about self-organization, not necessarily biological self-organization, but the core idea as understand it is this, that if a system, a self-organizing system, want to continue to exist through time, it must restrict itself to a very small set of states, namely the one that it should expect to encounter on the supposition that it continues existing. So what does it mean? Well, basically this, that if we look at this boy as my state space, okay, the space of all possible states I can find myself in, and we suppose that the horizontal axis charts my bodily temperature, say, I must inhabit a very small region of that space, okay, the one that floats around me having about 33.6 degrees of bodily temperature. And the more I depart from that state, the more I have trouble continue existing as a single system, okay? So that's it, basically. Now, if you buy into the free energy story, you also buy a specific definition of what a system in the relevant sense is. And the definition is this: a system is a thing that has a Markov blanket, meaning that you can find two sets of state, termed sensory and active, such that once the value of those states is fixed, this system, the things on one side of the blanket and the rest of the world are conditionally independent. Okay, they are independent. The goings on one side of the blanket are independent from the goings on the other. Okay, enough with premises. The blanket challenge to the extended mind, who we proposes basically is this. Well, if you buy into the predictive coding account, then you know where the Markov blanket of the mental machinery is. The account tells you. It consists of the states of the primary sensory cortices and the states of the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. And if that is correct, clearly the extended mind is false. Why? Well, first, within, so to speak, that Markov blanket, you find just neural stuff, no external resource in there. First. Secondly, once the sensory input, okay, the state of the primary sensory cortices and the motor output, the states of the dorsal horn, are fixed, the goings on inside of the central nervous system are conditional and independent on environmental goings on. And that clearly runs counter the extended mind. So what could an extended mind enthusiast say in response? Well, first thing, I think, true but unimpressive. Why? Well, because if you read the free energy literature, you'll notice that literally everything has its own Markov blanket. Why? Well, because to be a thing is to have a Markov blanket. And this is why you find Kapriskin with the allegory in a bug, or Sergei Rubin making very strange sounding claims about ecological niches or the entire biosphere having its own Markov blanket. If there is a thing you can see persist through time, then you have a Markov blanket, okay? And given that allegedly extended cognitive system will persist through time, they will have a Markov blanket on their own. So the real issue here seems to be this. If everything has its own Markov blanket, the real point is that of finding a principal criterion to single out the Markov blanket in which you find the cognitive machinery, okay? How should we choose the relevant Markov blanket? And there is a, say, standard procedure in the literature, okay? This will require some translation from free energy principles to English, okay? So Howe writes, for instance, it's most plausible that a minimal entropy system is constituted by the nervous system of a biological organism. Extended agents do not maintain low entropy in the long run. And similarly, Kirchhoff and Kivessen, trying to defend the extended mind, write, well, external resources form part of an agent's mind when they are poised to play a part in the process of active inference that keeps surprise at minimum over time. That is, minimizes free energy in the long run over time. The idea is this, that the relevant Markov blanket you should pick up is the one surrounding, so to speak, a system that minimizes free energy / prediction error over time, okay, on average. And that, to me, seems a terrible suggestion. So, to persuade you that it is a terrible suggestion, I will just give you two quick examples, okay? So first, consider clothes. Well, clothes do play a role in our thermoregulation. If you wonder how people manage to stay around 36 degrees of bodily temperature in winter, it is partially because they wear clothes, okay? So clothes play a role in minimizing the prediction error about our expectation of about our bodily temperature. And we typically do wear clothes, okay? So they play a narrow minimization role typically on average and in the long run. And yet it seems wrong to say that clothes are cogs in our thinking machinery. Why? Well, minimally because for something to be a cog in our thinking machinery, it must process information, and clothes do not appear to do that, okay? Secondly, take synapses. Prima facie, each and every synapse is a cog in our thinking machinery. But if that criterion is correct, the idea that each and every synapse is a cog in our cognitive machinery is false. Why? Well, because in normal neurodevelopment, we lose a lot of synapses, especially when we are young. And so there are certain synapses that, because they get pruned off, do not play a role in error minimization or free energy minimization in the long run. And so they were never part of our cognitive machinery, not even before pruning. And that is not just counterintuitive, I think, but also inconsistent with the free energy principle. And this story, the free energy principle, tells you about synaptic pruning, which very quickly is this. Your brain stores a model of the world. The model has parameters, and the parameters are encoded in synapses, okay? A model can have redundant parameters. Parameters you can get rid of without compromising the accuracy of the model. Well, the pruned synapses were the redundant parameters. Okay, so in conclusion, I think that Hui Markov blanket challenge does not entail the falsity of the extended mind hypothesis. The extended mind is at least consistent with predictive/free energy stories. And I also think that if you like to use Markov blankets to determine whether minds extend or not, you should find another criterion, because the one we have does not seem to work well. So thank you for the attention, and let's move on.
Thank you very much, Marco, and congratulations for your perfect time management. Now we have Giacomo. I remember.
Okay, I'm not
Zanotti,
sure.
sorry.
We're family.
Yeah, it seems like we are in a youth room.
Yeah.
So we have, and after all, is this Friday night, and we are it's 7 o'clock p.m. So we have Giacomo Zanotti's talk about scientistic stances and physicalism in the philosophy of mind. Please, thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Basically, today I would like to tell you something about radical forms of naturalism and physicalism, about the nature of mental states. So I will briefly present the notion of physicalism and naturalism, and then I will focus on two naturalistic proposals that qualify as radical, and I will argue that they are hardly compatible with a physicalist account of mental properties. So starting with the mind-body problem, to make a long story short, but the mind-body problem is the problem of determining the relationship between the mental and the physical realm. And as we know, a number of answers have been provided. We have physicalism, that is arguably the prevailing view nowadays, stating that mental properties are nothing over and above physical properties. We have dualism, taking mental properties to be a distinct kind of fundamental properties in addition to the physical ones. We have Russellian monism or panpsychism, we have allomorphism, and so on. Today, I will focus on physicalism and dualism. On the one hand, this is due to the fact that the time is not that much. But on the other, the debate is largely driven by this contraposition. True, panpsychism is receiving a lot of attention, but we can leave it aside for the moment. So, coming to the naturalism bit. When we think about naturalism, we think about the Quinian adage about the continuity between philosophy and science, where this continuity is interpreted mainly at a methodological level. However, this is too simple, and at least two big families of naturalistic views can be kept apart. On the one hand, we have methodological naturalism, which captures the core of the Quinian adage, and on the other, we have metaphysical or philosophical forms of naturalism that posit explicit constraints on the kinds of entities that we can take to be existent. However, even this is too simplistic, and the truth is that there is no univocal notion of naturalism we can appeal to. However, we can say something about naturalism in the philosophy of mind, and what we can say is that in the philosophy of mind, naturalistic projects typically have physicalist agenda. Think about projects such as the naturalization of content or intentionality. The underlying commitment is a deeply physicalist one. And in fact, naturalism is often used as synonymous with physicalism when it comes to the nature of mental states. So two questions are worth considering. The first is, does naturalism always involve a commitment to physicalism about the mind? But this is a question I will not consider. There's plenty of literature in this. Another question that I would like to focus on is maybe less considered in the literature, and it is the following. Is naturalism always compatible with physicalism about the mind? In most cases, it arguably is. However, I will argue that when radical forms of naturalism are considered, then we should be careful in taking for granted that there is this compatibility. So, starting with radical naturalism, the first version of radical naturalism that I take into account is characterized by a certain eliminative tendency toward traditional metaphysics. And in particular, I have in mind which is naturalism, according to which philosophers should just take science at its face value without forcing it into a preferred mold, without adding philosophical glosses to the data that are provided by scientists. And something along these lines is advocated by Maddi, according to which the philosopher is born native to the laboratory. So, leaving aside these slogans, the point is that philosophy should be pursued on purely empirical grounds. So the take-home message could be just look at the data when doing philosophy. So since we have to look at the data, look at the data. The relevant data when it comes to the nature of mental properties is arguably the data concerning the neural correlates of consciousness. As we all know, however, there are different explanations of the reason why we observe these correlations. On the one hand, the physicalist accounts for them by positing that mental properties are metaphysically necessitated by physical properties. However, also the dualist has an explanation that is positing that mental properties are nomologically necessitated by physical properties. Then the details depend on the specific position that is considered, but we can think about Chalmers dualism, in which we have mental properties, we have physical properties, and we have psychophysical laws putting them in relation, and crucially, these laws are contingent. So the point is that when it comes to the neural correlates of consciousness, the evidence we have available is perfectly compatible with non-physicalist views. And this is a problem for the physicalist that wants to adopt the radical naturalistic approach that we've just seen that limits to empirical facts. As a matter of fact, there is no fact that allows us to distinguish between nomological and metaphysical necessity. And so it appears that being committed to eliminative naturalism leads to a sort of agnosticism concerning the nature of the mind. However, this may come as no surprising at all. After all, the mind-body problem is a distinctively metaphysical question, and these stances, these naturalistic stances, are eliminativist toward metaphysics. But as far as I can see, the same problem affects also radical versions of naturalism that are not eliminative in spirit. In particular, I want to take into account Latimer's materialistic scientism. That should be a combination of empiricism, à la Van Frassen, and materialism. Crucially, Lehman's view is not an eliminative one. It is, in fact, a materialist one, and materialism is a distinctively metaphysical position. According to Lehman, we can do metaphysics and also have empirical testing for our positions, but by considering the success of these metaphysical positions in inspiring successful scientific theories. So we really see that the radical naturalistic part can be combined with the physicalist one. Where is the problem? Well, the problem is that, as we've seen, the mind-body problem is underdetermined by evidence, and in particular, it is strongly underdetermined by the empirical evidence, which means that there is no possible observation that could break this underdetermination. So usually in these circumstances, philosophers and also scientists appeal to theoretical virtues. And in particular, what the physicalist does is arguing that her explanation of why we observe the neural correlates of consciousness is more parsimonious than the dualist one. She doesn't have to posit new fundamental properties in addition to the physical ones. And so the physicalist argues we have a reason to prefer physicalism over dualism. The problem is that one of the key components of Lehman's view is that theoretical virtues cannot be decisive in theory choice in metaphysics when they are decoupled from any prospect of empirical success, which means that if we have to decide between two views in metaphysics, which are empirically equivalent, that means that they account for the available evidence and they allow for the same prediction, then we cannot use empirical virtues to decide between them. But physicalism and dualism, at least in its contemporary fashion, are taken to be empirically equivalent. They account for the data we have available and they allow for the same predictions. Hence, theory choice, hence we cannot use simplicity to break underdetermination in Lehman's framework. And so at this point, the question is, how can Lehman's scientism also be materialistic? So, taking stock, we have seen that naturalism is often associated with physicalism in the philosophy of mind, but we should be careful when considering radical forms of naturalism because some of them, at least, are incompatible with physicalism about mental states. So thank you and sorry for the quick presentation.
Thank you very much, Giacomo. It was very clear. And so we can proceed with our last speaker of this session, who is Marco Degano. And the title of his talk is Dreyfus Meets 4E Cognition. Please, Marco.
As Master Obi-Wan Kenobi famously said a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, hello there. But we've all saluted, as you can easily guess, I'm not that big in proper salutation. So let me jump right into what I've been discussing today. To be more precise, today I will be delving into the interesting topic of expertise. Well, that's quite a general term to use, as we all know, but to be more precise, I will be focusing on Dreyfus's account of expertise alongside a brief touch on what I like to call, in a quite ominous slogan, I've got to say, the sources of expertise. So first of all, let me tell you what's on the menu. First of all, I will just introduce the overall account of Dreyfus, then compare it to the 4E paradigm in general and the radical understanding of it in particular, then elaborate on these ominous sources of expertise, and then touch on a few problems we should find in Dreyfus's account. So first of all, let me introduce the theory of the man himself. First of all, expertise is something we're not born with, but surprise, we develop throughout several stages, starting from learning abstract rules and maxims, as Dreyfus himself calls them. Then we implement in practice, and alongside a development of affectivity, the huge impact of the groups we're part of, and the beliefs and opinions we take on from them, alongside a piling up of more and more experience, we finally reach full-fledged expertise, which in Dreyfus's view, amounts to skillful coping. Unluckily, I cannot sum up the whole idea of skillful coping in one single incisive sentence, luckily, but suffices to say that, first of all, skillful coping amounts to knowledge, as you can easily read on the first slide. To be more precise, on formal knowledge, that is to say, basically knowledge pertaining to matters and general domains. And as far as know-how is concerned, it basically deals with bodily abilities. Just to give you a quick example, know that amounts to knowing musical theory. Know-how amounts to knowing the concrete instrument. Second, according to Dreyfus, the whole of cognition can ultimately reduce to skills, be them crude skills, that is, those skills which do not require much of attention, or subtle skills, which on the other hand requires much more of attention. Then we have affordances, problem solving, and optimal gestalt. Well, optimal gestalt, I've got to be honest with you, is quite of a squishy notion, but suffice it to say that it amounts to skills which are stored, according to Dreyfus, in our minds as dispositions which are triggered by solicitations coming from the surrounding environment, so that basically they do impact on one another, on each other's development, and they do bring forth this sort of perspective which we rely on when coping with current situations. Let me now compare Dreyfus's account to the overall Fourier paradigm. As we can easily guess, Dreyfus's account displays the 4 E features. Second, Dreyfus's account endorses quite a staunch brand of anti-representationalism, paired on a huge relying on notions drawn from ecological psychology and dynamic systems theory as well. Finally, at least I contend that Dreyfus's account actually meets Gallagher's requirement, according to which, in order to achieve an accurate and exhaustive account of cognition, we must take into account both the sensory motor abilities and affectivity alongside subjective and intersubjective interactions. Well, so far so good, you might say, or so I hope at least. But let me get to something a bit juicier. As you can see on this slide, you might be thinking, are you sure? Are you really speaking of meaning, given that it is the cognitive science, it is the cognitive sciences you're talking about? Well, those with a background in phenomenology will probably know the drill. First of all, let me elaborate quickly on the notion of autopoiesis, which of course has been developed by the late Francisco Varela and Humberto Maturana, who suddenly passed away not so many days ago. But I will be focusing on Thompson's take on it, as it seems to be the most philosophically friendly, just to say. First of all, autopoiesis amounts to operational closure, first of all. That is to say, organisms behave and function according to internal laws and principles alone, with no reference to external phenomena or factors whatsoever. Second, structural coupling amounts to the idea that, okay, of course, organisms are operationally closed, but they are paired with the surrounding environment nonetheless, so that these ongoing and continuous mutual relationship between the two of them gives rise to what Thompson calls sense making. So first of all, what does sense making amount to? Sense making amounts to autopoiesis plus adaptivity. That is to say, in short, meeting the challenges and threats which are posed upon us by the environment. Thomson stretches the notion of sense-making to the extent that he contends that cognition as a whole is a matter of sense-making. And cognition, according to Thomson, amounts to bringing forth a word is an action. That is to say, of course, in just like any other enactivism content, according to Thomson, cognition is action-oriented. But also, being action-oriented means meeting the environment's challenges. And that is made possible by drawing on what we consider meaningful in the environment. Although meaningful in these contexts, it's quite close to the notion of significance as developed by Chamero, among the others, and other ecological psychologists such as, of course, James Gibson. But what is so interesting about this brand of enactivism? First of all, it helps us reject behaviorism, which might sound old-fashioned, but to tell you the truth, many critics of the 4E paradigm, especially in its radical understanding, in its radical reading, basically, according to these guys, 4E cognition is but behaviorism revamped. I do not think so, because Thomson variant of enactivism helps us show that cognition is a biological, active, and motivated phenomenon, alongside the fact that things such as affordances and environment do not merely impact on us on merely neurobiological level, but they do really shape our first person, embodied, and involved perspective. Let me now further elaborate on what there might be going on between expertise and sense-making. Let me first go back to Dreyfus's understanding of skillful coping. According to Dreyfus, skillful coping is an involved, motivated, and effective learned interaction with the current situation, which is quite similar, to tell the truth, when compared to Thomson's account, so that we can basically say that problem solving in Dreyfus's terms is sense-making. Moreover, while relying on this brand of enactivism can also help us ground Dreyfus's theory of expertise. Why is that so? When reading Dreyfus's work, one will likely think it looks quite fine on a merely behavioral level. But let us get to something juicier. How about a body of evidence? Do you have any of them? Do you have any of it? Doesn't look so. Therefore, these Thomson variant or brand of enactivism can help us in doing so. On the other hand, Dreyfus's account would be quite beneficial to Thomson variant or brand of enactivism, in that many a critic of this brand of enactivism thought that at the end of the day, it's just some sort of sci-fi framework, new agey stuff, or mystical mambo jumbo. And to the extent that Jaegwon Kim was quite right when he, in his 1990 paper, Supervenience as a Philosophical Concept, said that biologically inspired variants of emergentism are basically weird new age stuff. Therefore, I think that Dreyfus' account would help us eschew this out of context oddball elements. On the other hand, focusing on Dreyfus' account can help us, at least to some extent, recast our qualms on which kind of naturalism we should endorse when doing research in the 4E part. That is to say, do we really want to make some more room for phenomenological notion? Spoiler alert, I do think so. Let me just briefly touch on a few problematic points and gaps in Dreyfus's account. First of all, despite saying, yeah, we need no representation in our account, he actually went back to that statement, basically said that he's been too bombastic and said, maybe we still need them. Why? First of all, how we might endorse. How can we endorse know that with no representations? And on the other hand, rules and maxims implied in the early stages of his developmental model of expertise seem to be representational in nature. Following from the previous remark, how do we stand any ground in solving the scaling up problem? That is to say, does higher order cognitions emerge from or supervene on lower order cognition with no need for representations? And finally, consciousness. For those wondering, I love overcomplicating my life. As far as consciousness is concerned, why consciousness, you might ask? Well, to my best knowledge and understanding, consciousness is the most phenomenological notion we might think of. But somehow Dreyfus, which is a self-proclaimed phenomenologist, providing an inherently phenomenological theory of cognition, still manages to overlook the notion. And I really don't know why. Wrapping the whole thing up. Why expertise? Well, I think that expertise might turn quite useful in unifying the 4E paradigm by subsuming the 4Es under expertise. At the same time, we might gain some insight, at least, in solving, or so I hope, the scaling up problem, alongside finally meeting a chance for ditching representations once for all. I thank you for your attention, and sorry for my kind of restless pace of talking, as my best friends usually call it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Marco, for a very interesting talk. So now we have half an hour for the discussion. So I suggest that everyone that has a question writes in the chat or just open the mic, because we are so few that it's not, we don't go too formal.
I hope I did not exceed the time limit.
Yeah, you did, but not so much.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. You touched so many topics that I was scared at the beginning, but then you managed very well to be okay. We have the first question by Michele Di Francesco. For Michele, you have to switch on your mic.
Thank you. I asked for first because I'm not sure to arrive at the end of this half an hour because it was a very hard day. Giacomo, just a clarification question. You presented in a very clear way a sort of divorce between physicalism and naturalism. So let me say it this way. And could you say something more about what you take now to be naturalism in this context? I mean,
yeah. In general, I don't think it's possible. I mean, if we have naturalistic positions that range from Ricci and Mehdi that really think that philosophical questions have to be answered on the basis of empirical data. And just to give you an idea, according to Mehdi, when considering the skeptical scenario of the brain in a vat, the answer is no, maybe this is not possible because our knowledge of the nervous system is not developed enough to put a brain in a vat, and so this is just to give you an idea of how radical those stances can be. So this is naturalism, but also Chalmers is naturalism, or at least he wants to be a naturalist. And his being a naturalist basically consists in his providing an account that is compatible with the evidence we have available and is consistent with what has been done in the history of science, because positing new fundamental properties, Chalmers says, is something that has already been done in physics. And so also this is naturalism. So basically, I don't think there is really a notion of naturalism that we can refer to in an unequivocal way. This is why I believe it could be interesting to distinguish between particular forms of naturalism. And here I've decided to focus on really radical forms of naturalism, and then examining whether they are compatible with physicalism or whatever, because otherwise the category naturalism is simply too wide.
Do you, I appreciated the answer. Do you think that there is a role for normativity in order to make a distinction between certain idea of naturalism and stronger one? I mean,
in which sense?
Condition of satisfaction, which are not defined in terms of causality or things like that. For example, truth makers that are not. I'm not clear. Okay.
I'm not sure I got the question right.
Well, for example, intentionality could be naturalized, and normally we think to do that with physical, so to speak, relations. But there is also a sense in which intentionality is taken as a primitive notion, and which is simply part of the world. In this sense, it cannot be explained away in terms of physical stuff.
I guess this would be a failure of a naturalistic program, because, I mean, it seems that the more you go naturalistic, and so the more on prima facie you are somehow rejecting some traditional metaphysics, the more, in fact, you are doing some strong metaphysical assumptions about what can count as fundamental and primitive. And so, yeah, basically having a primitive residue that is not, I don't know, physical particles and quantum fields is not something the radical naturalist would see as optimal. I guess that could be a point.
Yeah. Okay, it's enough for me to this evening. Next time. Thank you. And
other questions? Okay, I have, yeah.
I have not a question, is a comment to Marco's presentation. And
which Marco?
Oh, sorry, Marco Facchin. Sorry,
Okay.
Sorry, Marco Degano. And I think it's really a clear point. This is not exactly a conference question, but are you introducing your PhD thesis an argument to this extent, or is something more?
So I'm forced to do a lot of introduction when I give talks, because the predictive process of free energy community is very small, and no one really knows what we are doing. So there is a lot of introduction, but I think what I've said also has some, say, substantive aspects to it.
Okay.
I have a question, not a comment on Marco Facchin presentation. I was wondering, I mean, from your presentation, it seems to me that the take-home message is that in the extended mind framework and in the use of Markov blankets in predictive processing, the problem is more or less the same. To simplify, the problem is that we don't have a way to distinguish what is really cognitive or mental from what is not. So, but I know that you are against the problem of the mark of the mental, that you think that it is not, this was not in this paper, but I know Mark.
Yeah, I don't think there is a
well. So I was wondering why the final question is not what is the mind after all, it's cognition, what distinguishes our brain or some information processing mechanism from what doesn't process information.
So I think that what is cognition is basically a question we can all answer by pointing to examples. But I don't think that or mental activity, what is mental activity? You can point to example, having emotion, perceiving, so on and so forth. But I don't think there is really anything tying them together. So I don't think there is a mark. If there is a mark, is hyper disjunctive with 347 exceptional cases, and that thing really is not a mark, it's just rewriting the list of mental processes or mental events you have based on your natural language intuition about what counts as mental. And for the Markov blanket extended mind part, yes, I do think that the problem is substantially the same. The idea of picking up what counts, where the mental machinery stops, because at some point you want it to stop. You don't want to say that the napkins I have in this drawer are part of my thinking machinery right now. But I think you can do that basically with mutual manipulability pretty well. The whole Markov blanket part is very strange. I don't think they can really work as a way to identify the boundaries of the mental for a variety of reasons. But the more, I think, theoretical substantial reason is this: that if you look at what a Markov blanket is, by definition, looking in Giulia's book or whatever book you want on Bayesian networks, basically, to identify the Markov blanket of something, typically a node, you must have already identified the node. So if I have a network and I show you a network, I cannot ask you, well, where is the Markov blanket here? I must specify what is the Markov blanket of this or that node here. And you can then define what the Markov blanket is. Now, if this is correct, it seems that in order to identify a Markov blanket, you must already have identified the thing, so to speak, surrounded by it. And that, it seems to me, make Markov blanket very inapt to solve the extended mind dispute.
Okay. It reminds me it reminds me some observations in the debate of extended mind. I think they are really parallel debates, because some objections to the extended mind are exactly that. If you talk about the mind that extends, and Arianna knows very well, you've already identified a mind from which to which the extension is, so to say, attached or individuated. Okay, I don't want to take all the space and the floor. If there are any other questions, maybe for the last speaker. Yeah.
maybe is another way to put perhaps clearly my question to Giacomo. I mean, the idea is that let's imagine that we are facing the hard problem of content. And then we have two alternatives. The first one is there is no naturalistic answer to the hard problem of content, so content must be eliminated. The other one is, no, I keep on with content, and this is a form of perhaps non-naturalistic, but not extravagant theory. I mean, what do you think about this sense?
Again, it may depend on which kind of naturalism we are talking about. I guess when it comes to radical naturalism, I guess elimination is not seen as a bad thing. If we think about the Churchlands, in that case, it is a form of naturalism that basically goes as follows. Okay, well, we have this thing in common sense or in false psychology or whatever that is content or an emotion or whatever. We check the data. We do not see something that corresponds to that thing. And so the obvious move is let's eliminate it. Let's just keep it as a maybe a useful residue of false psychology, but it does not fit into our scientific theories. But I think that these would be unsatisfying for many naturalists. After all, there are many naturalist philosophers of mind that do not share the Churchland's positions. Maybe a moderate naturalistic attitude would be just keep trying, and if you find some knockdown arguments telling you that content cannot be naturalized, then maybe the whole naturalistic project has to be revised. But until we don't have such knockdown arguments against the naturalization of content, then the project is still a viable one. And even when we have some knockdown arguments, there will be attempt to say that they are not knocked down, and the dialectic continues. But yeah, I guess depending on which kind of naturalism you have in mind, you can be more or less tempted to eliminate stuff.
Thank you. This amounts to something, saying something like take science seriously, and more or less. I mean, anyway, okay. I agree with your answer.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Can I have, sorry, I have a problem with my camera. Can I have just a clarification? Sorry, it's I raised my hand.
Yeah. Please.
Can I have just a quick clarification for Marco Degano?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, of course. I was just wondering, I'm not really an expert in affordances nor in Dreyfus philosophy. I was kind of interested in something that you said towards the end, that we can have knowledge debt without representation. Yeah. I'd ask if you can clarify a little bit more to me what would be the content of knowledge debt, and if in the absence of representation and by switch from representation to skills or affordances or something which is not conceptual, it still makes sense of, there is still a sense in talking about knowledge debt rather than simply, being more radical and just replace that notion as something which has no theoretical role.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, first of all. And in terms of content, well, speaking of content, as far as I understand, in Dreyfus's theory in general, as I've already mentioned, he doesn't really like representations. The question is, which understanding or which reading of representation is he relying on? Because on the one hand, we might distinguish between the philosophy of mind, general reading of representation. On the other, we might have the philosophy of the cognitive sciences reading of representation, and you might ask, what's really the difference? Well, in terms of, I'm sure many of you will know, I'm sure many of you knows the drill. Basically, representations in set context amount to patterns of neural activity. And that's it. Therefore, exactly how might we entertain knowledge in general? That is actually the point. We might we might rely on Huttel and Mind's take on radical embodied cognition, which is based around the notion of content involving states of mind rather than content based. But somehow that just seems to be a rebranding, there being vehicles bearing content. So that really is the bummer at the end of the day about in Dreyfus's theory. He says we can do very well without representations. Yeah, but why? Can you please give me some some much needed evidence for that? Much more of an argument. Mm-hmm. Maybe most of all, he was back in his early days. He was quite big in taking on experiments, testing his ideas on skillful coping and so on and so forth. But somehow, I just don't know why he suddenly made up his mind and said, "Yeah, well, I'm done with that," which is quite a problem because that is the place where the answer lies, or so I contend at least.
Okay, thanks.
I hope I've been clear enough.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Other questions? We have still some more minutes if you are still alive after this day. Okay, I just have a minor, maybe a clarification. I'm sorry for Marco Degano.
Please do.
At the end of your talk, the slide in which you seem to propose, but maybe I misunderstand your point, so to say, to subsume the 4E approach under the only E of Dreyfus. Maybe expertise, like that.
Yeah.
Okay, this is because I think there are a lot of connections between Dreyfus' criticism to classical cognitive science and the approaches that you mentioned in your presentation of enactivism and the 4Es in general. But I wonder. It would be an ambitious project, and I don't know if you are developing it in your, I don't know, master thesis or PhD. I don't know which is your moment in time, but it is a very ambitious and interesting, but it's a big project. So I do well anyway.
Thank you. Well, I'm actually working on it in terms of my PhD project. And for those wondering, as I've already mentioned, that is probably the reason why behind all of these interests of mine and expertise is because I deeply love overcomplicating my life, maybe. But really, jokes aside, speaking of subsuming the 4Es under the E of expertise. As a final remark, we better distinguish between this is just something I came up with. That's not something there's no consensus over this thing. We might have expertise fit into the 4E paradigm in either two senses, as 4+1E cognition or as 5E cognition. Just sorry for speaking in slogans. Saying that we do have 5E cognition is basically saying, yeah, expertise is just the nth feature we might ascribe to cognition. Yeah, that's nothing so special. We might rather say, I contend that we might speak of 4+1, although I'm well aware that is quite ambitious. I am well aware.
Okay.
What hasn't been sleeping that well these days recently?
No, because I think that even the 4E cognition is a label that actually identifies very different positions which are even inconsistent between themselves. So it is not
exactly
a project, and that's why maybe the best thing to do would be to substitute altogether with
maybe.
I don't know, but
maybe
it's always with an E. It must start with an E. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay, so I thank all of you very much for having been here, and I hope you enjoyed the session, and thank you to the speakers, and have a weekend. And I presume the next meeting will be on next Thursday. I don't remember the time, but see you next Thursday for the SINe. Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.